Today we are going to start what is going to be kind of a scattered series, I guess is how I want to describe it. We may hit a couple weeks in a row, but we may have other lessons in between. Looking at some of the different names that God has identified himself to man with, and quite a few of them. We get so used to calling him God, using that we forget that as we go through Scripture, God always took on kind of personal names or descriptive names of himself in the different circumstances and moments in which he was interacting with man. And they had very specific purposes behind the name that he was giving. And a lot of those names, obviously they still apply to God. Obviously there are ones that can still carry forward. And so if we want to know God, if we want to understand who God really is, as that song sang, the more fullness, the greater understanding of his mind, of his actions, of his holiness, of his righteousness, of his promises, his blessings, of all of those things that encompass who God is and what that means for us, then it's good for us to take time to go through and look at those different things of how he's described himself and what those names mean. As I say, we may have other lessons scattered in amongst this. It's not going to be, as I say, necessarily one where we're just going to take a name each week and go for the next however many weeks. It'll be a little more scattered than that probably. But this morning we're going to start with maybe one of the other names that we recognize or think of when we start thinking about God has other names than just God. This is one of the ones that we probably know a little better. Comes from one of the more familiar stories, probably one of the most familiar stories that everybody knows, even if they're not actively religious, partly because there's been some major movies made about it. And it's just one of those names that just has always kind of stuck up, even though when we hear it, we may not really think of it as being a name. And of course, if you've looked at your notes for this morning, what I'm referring to is Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 15, where we find the story of Moses encountering the burning bush, where Moses comes sort of face to face for the first time in his life with God. And so if you would, turn there to Exodus chapter 3 and read with me, beginning verse 1. We find that Moses was tending the flock of Jethro and his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock out to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And this is after he had to flee from Egypt. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush, and Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. And so Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that Moses had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Moses said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you say to the Israelites. I am has sent you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Now, as we begin looking at this topic this morning, what we find here is God giving what I describe as being a foundational name. It seems so simplistic, I am. And it is one that, as I say, we may not even typically would think of that as being a name. We'd be waiting for him to say, I am Jehovah, I am Yahweh, I am God, I am Lord. Any of the I am Elohim, all those different names that we're going to look at over future lessons. But God just says, I am. And when we start looking at those other names, one of the things that we're going to find out is, and this is why I call this a foundational name, is because all of those different names, as they take on their definitions, it is God saying, I am this thing to you. I am this aspect. I am the one who is your Savior. I am the one who is with you. I am the one who goes before you. I am the one who, all those different things. And so this is kind of that foundation that just is, I am. It's the beginning and the principle upon which all of them are going to be based. But we also realize, or begin to realize as we start thinking about the I am, that this is a name of presence. And it's interesting to me that as our text begins, and Moses sees that bush burning, and he turns aside and he goes to it, and as he's trying to investigate it, he hears God talking to him from it, calling his name, Moses, Moses. And how does Moses answer that? Moses says, I am here. Well, there's a little bit of irony in that because the I am is there. But that wasn't what Moses was saying, was it? Moses was saying, you're calling for Moses, I am present. Now, he could have answered that a lot of different ways. He could have said hello. He could have said, hey, who's talking? He could have said, here I am, present, here. You know, all kinds of different answers that we give when somebody starts calling us and trying to find out where we're at or whatever. But Moses uses this term, I am here. And maybe that's part of why God chooses to use the name I am in this moment and to describe himself in this way, is because he wants Moses to realize, I am present. I am here. And that's going to turn out to be a huge thing as we begin to think about what all God is trying to tell him here. And God says, I am the God of presence. I'm ever present. I am in all places at all times for all of eternity and beyond. God begins by introducing himself, and notice that he says, I am the God of your father, meaning I am the God of your lifetime. I'm also the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He just spanned across 4 or 5 generations of individuals, and we know from the timeline that's roughly 430 years that is covered by this time span that God gives him here. From the time that God called Abraham and said, hey, leave from where you're at and go to where I'm telling you, and Abraham entered into that covenant with God, to the time that Moses is standing before the bush, 430 years. Not since the flood had man lived that long. So we're talking about a God that spanned generations. But because he also identifies himself as being the God of Abraham, they know a little something about that. They know the promises that were given to Abraham. They have longed for those promises. They've looked for those promises. Short time period at this point, but they know something about the God that was the God of Abraham. They know the stories of Isaac. They know the stories of Jacob. They know the stories of Joseph and those that came beyond. They know who the God was that protected them and watched over them. They knew of his mightiness and his holiness and his eternal nature. And that's part of why when he identifies himself that way, it says Moses was afraid to look upon the bush any longer. He realized, I am in the presence of the living God. God says, I'm present in that way. I am here with you. It is I, the God that you know of. Verse 15, as we closed out that reading, when Moses asked, what name do I go? What do I tell them if they ask me? Is the name of the God that has sent me? And God said, tell them I'm the God of Abraham. Tell them I'm the God of Isaac. I'm the God of Jacob. Tell them I am. And he says, this is my name forever. Why? Because God is forever. The reality is he is the creator of time. He was there before time began as we know it and reckon it and count it by the revolutions of this earth around the sun and the moon around us and all of those different things. Before the seasons and the dates and the times, God was there. And he's here through every single rotation of this earth around the sun. Every single one of them, he is present. And when finally the day comes, when the day of judgment arrives and Jesus returns on the clouds to call those who are faithful home, those who are washed in his blood, and time ends, God will still be there. He will still be present. And so God says, I am. And for however many generations, I will be there. Your descendants will be able to count on you. And when they ask, what is his name? I'll say, I am the God of Abraham. I'm the God of Isaac. I'm the God of Jacob. I'm the God of David. I'm the God of Elijah. I'm the God of Peter and Andrew and Paul and all those others. And whether you recognize me or not, I am your God because I'm present and always will be. The interesting thing is you look at that description, though, that he's giving, we, like the Israelites, we think of those forefathers as being dead and gone, don't we? And yet God says, I am the God of. Jesus points to this in Matthew chapter 22, verses 31 and 32, as he is talking to those who are asking questions that day, and they're arguing about who's going to be married to who in the resurrection. And Jesus says, verse 31, but about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. I know I make this statement a lot of times, that as I'm working through these lessons, there's something that I've always thought of in one way, and then God, through the study, has shown me something different. This is another one of those cases. I've often used the example of how I picture God outside of that timeline in his eternity, and how there's an aspect in which I see God seeing Adam and Eve in the garden as he created them. At the very same moment, he can see Abraham as he's calling him. And at the very same moment, he can see Isaac, and he can see Jacob, and he can see us. Because he's outside of that timeline looking in at what he has created. He can see it all. It's part of how he's all-knowing. And I still stand by that. I still think that's accurate. It's not one of those things that I can point to a verse and say, this is the verse that definitively says that. But it's just when you start looking at his nature and understanding that. And I kind of have always thought of this as being one of those passages by statements by Jesus that kind of supported that. But as I was looking at this and thinking about this, I also began to understand a little more emphasis on the part about the resurrection that Jesus is making. Jesus says he's not the God of the dead because they're a part of the resurrection. They are living, they continue to live. Their time on earth is over and done with, but that doesn't mean that they're dead. Not the soul and the spirit that makes us who we are. Not the greater part that was truly created in the image of God. They're living on with God because they were in the covenant with God, because they were blessed by God and saved in that way. So God, as he's saying this, based on what Jesus is telling us, God is also saying, I'm not just going to be your God now, I'm going to be your God for eternity if you walk with me. There is the resurrection, there is life. It continues on. If you're in a relationship with me, that relationship does not end. Because I'm the God of the living. And I'm present with the living. But God doesn't stop there in our passage this morning. He uses this phrase, and he uses it a little more in the way maybe that we typically think of using the statement, I am, as Moses did, I am here. And so we see Jesus God bring out a few more things here with the I am present, or more than this is where I'm at. God uses to expand the application in the revelation of who he is. Verse 6, God said, I am the God of your father. Ever present. He begins by introducing himself. I'm mixed up here. Back myself up. Went to the wrong spot. Verses 7 through 9 is where I wanted to be. Not verse 6. Sorry about that. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. God says, not only am I present, I'm concerned about what's going on in the present. I am your God. I want to be your God. I'm the God of the living. I am present for your lifetime, for your generation. And I'm concerned about you. I'm not just here. I'm not just watching the world go around like it's some top that I pulled the string on and set into motion and just to wait and watch and see how it all falls apart or falls down at the end when it stops spinning. He says, I see the details. I see the masters, the slave drivers. I hear the cries of misery. I feel the pain. I understand. I am concerned about your well-being. So verse 8, he says, so I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of the land into good and spacious land flowing with milk and honey. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. They were a people who had begun to feel like maybe God wasn't present. When they entered into Egypt, it was God leading them there because there was famine going on where they were at. God was taking them to a place where he would provide for them, where he would see them safely through that. And they lived a very blessed life under the Pharaoh that knew Joseph. They began to grow and to expand and to become more of what God was wanting them to be when they went into the land. But as we will see them do time after time again, their memories of God sometimes drew short. As happens all the time with us, their ability to be obedient, to hold faithful to God, struggled. And then the Pharaoh came who didn't know God, who didn't know Joseph, and enslaved them. And so now as they're there in this misery of the slavery and things are not going right and they're losing their hope and they're forgetting and beginning to think God has turned his back on us and the promises are not going to be fulfilled. And we can understand what that's like, can't we? We have too many times where we don't go through anything near what they were going through, and we feel like God has turned his back on us, or God is not there, or God is gone. And we struggle in our faith, and we have those doubts sometimes. God wanted them to know this is not the case. I am ever present. And even when things are happening, even when things are going bad, even when things are a struggle, I am here and I am concerned about the things that are happening, and I'm concerned about you. And then you get to verse 10. After he tells them that, and he says, so now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Not only did God see their need, not only was he concerned about their situation, again, it was not like watching the top unwind. God said, I don't just see it. I'm not just concerned about it. I'm not just sitting back wishing that it hadn't gone this direction. God says, I'm still going to step in and do something about it. And so I am the sender of help in the time of need. Isn't that a great reminder for God? One that we need at different moments in our lives, when we start feeling that way, when we start having those moments of doubt, when we are facing the struggles and Satan is trying to get us, and we feel like he's winning. We need to remember the name of God. I am. I'm here. I understand what's happening. And I am working in your best interest. He sent Moses to lead them from a land of misery to a land of promise, of prosperity, and a land of purpose. He sent Moses to lead them to a covenant that would remind them, here are the things that God expects from you, the things God desires from you, and the things God desires for you. Here are the things that if you walk within the covenant, God will do for you, how he will interject into these situations, and how he will help you to overcome them. But he also sent Moses to warn them, if you don't keep the covenant, if you don't walk in faith, if you don't seek my guidance and seek my help, here are the things that I'm going to interject that are not so good. And so as we begin to look at this and see this and understand what God is saying with a simple statement of, I am who I am. The reality is he's saying, I can't be anything else. I'm ever present, never changing. I have always been the God of love. I will always be the God of love. I am the God of justice, and I will always be the God of justice. I am the God of vengeance, and I will always be the God of vengeance. I'm the God of grace, the God of mercy. I'm the God who created you. I'm the God who will save you. I am what I am and have always been and will always be. Powerful statements by God to Moses. What about application for us still today, though? God is still the God of generations. He is still very much present. The sun came up this morning because God is present. We can still breathe air because God is present. We gather and we worship here because God is present. Because he is who he has always been. God is still seeing and hearing our plight. He still knows our struggles. He still knows and understands who we are and how easily we change. How easily we struggle, how easily we stray from the path. How many times there are reasons for concern because of our own choices and our own actions, and how many times there's reason for concern because somebody else's actions and choices are affecting us despite ours for him. He's understood our need from the moment Adam and Eve ate of the tree in the garden. Because of who he is, he's understood, he's been concerned, he knows the need for us to have a way back to him, and that's the reason Jesus was sent. It is why we still lift our hearts and pray, and we're confident that he will answer. Because he's not a God that is removed from his creation. He's not a God that has just left us to our own devices. He is still the God who says, if you will come to my covenant, if you will be a part of my faithful, if you will walk with me and seek my way and my guidance, I will be and I am your God. Peter writes, 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 and 7, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. A couple things within that. Humble ourselves. Submit to his mighty hand. Submit to his covenant. Submit to his ways. Submit to the things that he seeks for us so that he can lift us up in due time. That is, in his time. That is, in his proper timing. And as that one who can see all that there is in that timeline, He's the only one of us that sees the whole picture. He's the only one of us that knows the exact right moment to act. How many times have you tried to figure out how to deal with something and you know the timing's got to be right for what you want to do to try to deal with it for it to work? And how many times in doing that do we get to the other side of it and we look back and say, boy, if I'd have just waited just a few more minutes before I did that. Or, boy, if I'd have just acted just a little bit sooner, that all went just like I had it planned. Well, we miss those marks because we don't see the full picture. God does. If we submit ourselves to the one who can see that full picture, when the time is right, when the moment is perfect, God will act. He did with sending Jesus. Scripture tells us when the moment was right, when the time was right, Jesus came to save us. We've identified a lot of things that made that the right moment. The Roman Empire, the roads going everywhere, the safety on the roads, and a lot of those different things, a common language in the world for probably the first time since the Tower of Babel. A lot of things led to why it was the right timing for Jesus to come. But there are other aspects of our lives where Jesus and God see our plight. They know our concerns. They know our needs. And they understand when to send the help. There are a lot of stories I could share with you, and I have in the past about some of those things. If you want examples of it, just catch me. I'll tell you some of them. Won't take time this morning. But the reality is God is still the God who sends help in a time of need. He sent Jesus fulfilling our greatest need. And as Paul talks about in Philippians chapter 4, he sends help through others. Philippians chapter 4, Paul is sharing with them about having received their gifts. He says, I wasn't looking for gifts from you. I've learned how to live with them and how to live without them. I've learned how to be content. But I'm grateful that God has sent that help through you. And then verse 19, he says, and my God will meet all of your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. Sometimes we look and we see what we would describe as blessings being poured out upon others, and we feel left out. We don't know why they're getting it, but my needs aren't seeming to be met in the moment or whatever. It's because we don't understand the timing. It may be that God is blessing that individual because there's a moment coming when the timing is going to be perfect that your blessing comes through that person. When we experience blessings coming in our own lives, it may be that part of why God is blessing us in that moment is preparing us for the moment when he needs us to be the blessing in somebody else's life at just the right moment in theirs. God is not limited by the ways in which he helps. He can do it with the sound of his voice or through those who are his believers. This is the God who has always been and who continues to be. And that is why he wears the name, I am. Jesus capitalizes on the meaning behind that name 7 different times when he describes himself. I am the bread of life. I am living water. Those different statements. And we'll probably get to those at some point. But all of those, again, harken back to his deity, to his role as part of the Godhead. The same concept, the same meaning. I am. Have you put your trust? Have you put your faith? Have you put your confidence in the God of I am? He is here. He is concerned for you. And if you haven't done that, he's greatly concerned for you. And he's sending you messages to say, I want to help. I'm here to help. Walk with him. Get to know the God of I am. If we can help you with that in some way this morning, let us know how we can help as we stand together and sing.